The morning of September 19, 1944. Near Ericourt, France. General-Lieutenant Otto von Mancherfeld stands in the turret of his command vehicle, binoculars pressed against his eyes, scanning the rolling terrain ahead. His 5th Panzer Army has just launched what should be a decisive counterattack against Patton's 3rd Army. He commands some of Germany's finest, the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, equipped with the feared Panther tanks. Each Panther mounts a 75mm gun capable of penetrating any Allied armor at ranges exceeding a mile. On paper, this should be a massacre. But something is wrong. Through the morning haze, von Mancherfeld sees them. Not dozens. Not scores. Hundreds of American M4 Sherman tanks, spread across the landscape like a mechanical tide. For every Panther he commands, the Americans seem to have 10 Shermans. And behind those 10, another 10 are arriving. And behind those, fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, recovery vehicles, all moving with the inexorable rhythm of an industrial machine that simply will not stop. In 72 hours, von Mancherfeld's force will be shattered. Not through superior American technology. Not through better armor or bigger guns. But through something the German High Command had dismissed as irrelevant, the simple, overwhelming mathematics of mass production. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This is the story of how Germany's finest military minds convinced themselves that engineering excellence would defeat industrial capacity, how they mocked the American Sherman tank as inferior, crude, and unworthy of respect. And how 50,000 of those inferior tanks crushed the Third Reich not despite their limitations, but through the sheer, unrelenting power of quantity. It's a story about the collision between German military tradition and American industrial reality. About the moment when Wehrmacht officers realized that the war they thought they were fighting, a war of technological sophistication and tactical brilliance, had been replaced by something they had no answer for, the endless productive capacity of a nation that could simply outbuild any enemy on Earth. To understand how German generals came to mock the Sherman, you must first understand what they were comparing it to. By 1944, German tank development had reached extraordinary heights. The Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger, the Tiger I, mounted an 88mm gun derived from Germany's legendary anti-aircraft cannon. Its frontal armor measured 100mm thick. At ranges of 1,000 meters, a Tiger could penetrate any Allied tank while remaining effectively invulnerable to return fire from most Allied weapons. The Tiger's psychological impact on Allied tank crews was immense. British and American tankers developed what some commanders called Tiger phobia, a reluctance to engage when intelligence suggested Tigers were in the area. Then came the Panther. The Panzerkampfwagen V, developed in response to encountering the Soviet T-34 on the Eastern Front, combined thick, sloped armor with a high-velocity 75mm gun. The Panther's frontal armor, set at a 55-degree angle, was effectively impenetrable to the Sherman's standard 75mm gun at combat ranges. German tank crews knew this. German generals knew this. The mathematics of armor penetration were not subjective, they were physics, cold and absolute. Against this technological sophistication, the American M4 Sherman seemed almost primitive. The Sherman mounted a standard 75mm gun. Later variants carried a 76mm gun, but even this upgrade struggled against German heavy armor. The Sherman's frontal armor measured just 51mm at its thickest point, roughly half that of a Tiger. It was taller than German tanks, presenting a larger target. Its gasoline engine, while reliable, was prone to catastrophic fires when penetrated, leading German tankers to nickname it the Tommy Cooker or the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter company's advertising slogan, "Lights first time, every time." The Germans had legitimate reasons for their confidence. In tank versus tank combat, under controlled conditions, a Tiger or Panther would defeat a Sherman most of the time. German training emphasized precision gunnery and defensive positioning. Their doctrine called for tanks to engage at maximum range, where their superior guns and armor provided overwhelming advantage. When a single Tiger could knock out multiple Shermans before they could close to effective range, the question seemed settled. German tank design, German tactical doctrine, German crew training, all were superior. But the Germans were making a fundamental error. They were preparing to fight the wrong war. While Germany focused on crafting individual masterpieces of engineering, America was building a production system unlike anything the world had ever seen. The statistics are staggering, almost incomprehensible. Between February 1942 and July 1945, American factories produced 49,234 Sherman tanks. 49,000. To put this in perspective, Germany produced approximately 1,347 Tiger I tanks during the entire war. They built roughly 492 Tiger II tanks, the even more formidable successor to the Tiger I. Panther production, the most numerous of Germany's heavy tanks, reached about 6,000 units. Do the mathematics. For every Tiger I that rolled off German production lines, America built 36 Shermans. For every Panther, America built 8 Shermans. But even these ratios understate the disparity, because they only count Shermans. Add in the other American armored vehicles, tank destroyers, self-propelled artillery, armored personnel carriers, and the gap becomes a chasm. American production wasn't just about numbers. It was about systems. The Sherman was designed from the beginning for mass production and field maintenance. Its components were standardized. Its engine, while unsophisticated compared to German designs, was reliable and easy to repair. A damaged Sherman could often be recovered, repaired, and returned to service within days. The same could not be said for German tanks. Consider the logistical chain required to keep a Panther operational. The Panther's Maybach HL-230 engine was a precision instrument, powerful but temperamental. Its interleaved roadwheel system, those overlapping wheels visible on the sides of German tanks, provided excellent weight distribution and ride quality. But when one wheel was damaged, the entire assembly often had to be disassembled to replace it. In the muddy conditions of the Eastern Front or the winter freeze of the Ardennes, this design became a nightmare. Mud would pack between the wheels and freeze overnight, immobilizing the tank. Repairs that took hours on a Sherman took days on a Panther. The German tank crews were superb. Their training was thorough, their tactics were sound, their courage was undeniable. But they were operating machines that demanded perfection in conditions that made perfection impossible. A Panther that broke down 50 kilometers behind the front line, waiting for specialized parts that might never arrive because Allied aircraft had destroyed the supply convoy, was worth nothing. A Sherman that could be field repaired with parts that arrived by truck every 48 hours remained a functional weapon. Yet German military leadership, particularly in the first years after American entry into the war, remained convinced that quality would triumph over quantity. This wasn't mere arrogance. It was rooted in legitimate historical precedent. German military theory, dating back to the Prussian reforms of the 19th century, emphasized superior training, better doctrine, and technological edge as force multipliers. In the Franco-Prussian War, in the early victories of World War I, in the stunning success of the Blitzkrieg in 1940, these factors had proven decisive. Why should this war be different? The answer lay in something the German General Staff had fundamentally misunderstood: the nature of industrial warfare in the 20th century. Germany in 1944 was a nation under siege. Allied bombing had begun to devastate industrial capacity. The Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, faced constant air attack. Raw materials were increasingly scarce. Chromium for armor plating, molybdenum for steel hardening, tungsten for armor-piercing ammunition, all were in desperately short supply. The Nazis had conquered vast territories, but they could not conjure resources that didn't exist or protect factories from high-altitude bombers. America, by contrast, was untouched. No bombs fell on Detroit. No enemy armies threatened the approaches to Pittsburgh's steel mills. The entire productive capacity of the American industrial base could be directed toward war production without fear of disruption. When President Roosevelt called for America to become the arsenal of democracy, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. The Ford Motor Company alone produced almost 9,000 tanks during the war. The Chrysler Detroit Arsenal tank plant, built specifically for Sherman production, covered 113 acres under one roof. At peak production, the facility completed one Sherman tank every 2 hours. This wasn't craftsmanship. This was industrial automation applied to warfare on a scale the world had never witnessed. But numbers mean nothing if the weapon itself is useless. And here is where German mockery began to reveal its fatal flaw. The Sherman, despite its disadvantages in direct combat against German heavy tanks, was actually a remarkably effective weapon system when used as the Americans intended. The Germans designed their tanks for tank versus tank combat. The Americans designed the Sherman for breakthrough and exploitation. Its role was to punch through enemy lines, destroy infantry positions, eliminate anti-tank guns, and wreak havoc in the enemy rear. When Shermans encountered German heavy tanks, American doctrine called for tank destroyers, specialized vehicles with powerful guns, to engage them. The Sherman's job was to keep moving. And in this role, the Sherman excelled. It was faster than German heavy tanks, more reliable, easier to maintain, and available in overwhelming numbers. Its stabilized gun, a feature no German tank possessed, allowed it to fire accurately while moving, a decisive advantage in fluid, mobile warfare. Its reliability meant that when a Sherman unit was ordered to advance, most of its tanks would actually make it to the objective. German units, by contrast, often left a trail of broken-down vehicles behind any significant movement. More importantly, the Sherman's simplicity meant American crews could be trained quickly and effectively. Germany was running out of experienced tank crews. Each veteran lost represented irreplaceable expertise. America was producing thousands of new tankers who, while perhaps not as skilled individually as their German counterparts, had something the Germans lacked, the certainty that if their tank was destroyed, another one was already on its way forward to replace it. The psychological impact of this certainty cannot be overstated. An American tank commander who lost his Sherman could reasonably expect to be assigned a new one within days. A German tank commander who lost his Panther might wait weeks or months for a replacement, if one came at all. The Americans fought knowing that even defeat could be temporary. The Germans fought knowing that each loss brought final defeat closer. This was the reality approaching von Mancherfeld's panzers near Ercourt in September 1944. The German command had planned this attack as a demonstration of superior German armor and tactics. They had concentrated their forces, achieved local superiority, and advanced with confidence. The American 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General John S. Wood, should have been overwhelmed. Instead, over the next 5 days, von Mancherfeld's force would be systematically destroyed. Not through American tactical brilliance, though the Americans fought well. Not through superior American tanks, though they used their weapons effectively. But through sheer, overwhelming numbers backed by an industrial system that could afford losses the Germans could not. The Americans fought knowing that every Sherman knocked out could be replaced. Every loss was tactical, temporary. The Germans fought knowing that every Panther destroyed was irreplaceable. Every engagement was strategic, final. The Battle of Ercourt began with German confidence intact. Von Mancherfeld's 113th Panzer Brigade, equipped with new Panther tanks, drove forward on September 19, expecting to scatter the American armor through superior firepower. The Panthers advanced in classic German fashion, disciplined, methodical, seeking favorable ground from which to engage at range. They found the 4th Armored Division waiting. What happened over the next 5 days shattered every assumption about how armored warfare should function. The Americans didn't fight the way German doctrine predicted. They didn't accept static, long-range engagements where the Panthers' gun and armor would dominate. Instead, they used their numbers. Sherman platoons would coordinate, maneuvering to force the Panthers to expose their thinner side armor. When a Panther engaged one Sherman, 2 more would be moving to flank. When those 2 were engaged, 4 more would appear from a different direction. The mathematics were brutal. Yes, the Panthers knocked out Shermans. The German crews fought skillfully, destroying multiple American tanks in individual engagements. But for every Sherman destroyed, another took its place. And another. And another. The Germans, by contrast, had no replacements. Each Panther lost was permanent. By September 23, the 113th Panzer Brigade effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. The Germans lost 86 tanks and assault guns. The 4th Armored Division lost 25 Shermans in the same period, and had already received replacement vehicles. Von Manschufel, assessing the disaster, noted in his after-action report that the Americans had demonstrated an almost incomprehensible capacity to absorb losses and continue attacking. He had encountered something German military theory had no answer for, an enemy who could afford to trade tanks at unfavorable ratios because the imbalance in production made even unfavorable trade strategically advantageous. The American tank crews at Aircourt weren't superhuman. They were citizen soldiers, many with only months of training. They made tactical errors. They took casualties. But they kept coming. When First Lieutenant Edwin Leeper's Sherman was knocked out on the second day of fighting, he and his crew evacuated, walked back to the division rear area, were assigned a new tank that had arrived overnight from ordnance, and returned to combat the following morning. The entire process took less than 18 hours. Try to imagine a German tank crew experiencing the same scenario. A Panther destroyed. The crew survives, walks back to their unit headquarters. And then what? Waits. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. No replacement tank arrives because there are no replacement tanks. The crew is reassigned to other duties, broken up, their experience dispersed. The Panther they lost will never be replaced. This was the grinding mathematical reality that German generals had dismissed as irrelevant. They had convinced themselves that 10 superior tanks could defeat 50 inferior ones through better tactics and crew quality. And in individual battles, under favorable conditions, they were sometimes correct. But the Americans weren't offering individual battles under favorable conditions. They were offering continuous, relentless combat across hundreds of miles of front line, day after day, week after week, where German tactical excellence became irrelevant against American industrial endurance. The mockery German officers expressed toward the Sherman was real and well documented. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's foremost tank commanders and theorists, dismissed American armor as mechanically crude. He wrote in 1943 that American tanks were no match for German engineering standards. Otto Carius, a famous Tiger tank ace who destroyed over 150 Allied vehicles, described the Sherman as a cheap tin can in his post-war memoir. These weren't empty boasts. These men had seen Shermans burn. They had witnessed their 88mm guns punch through Sherman armor like paper. Their contempt was based on direct experience. But their experience was misleadingly narrow. They saw tank versus tank combat. They didn't see the broader picture. Consider the logistical chain required to put a German heavy tank in combat and keep it there. A Tiger I weighed 54 metric tons. German railways could transport it, but bridges often could not support it. The Tiger required specialized rail cars for long-distance movement. Its wide tracks had to be removed and replaced with narrower transport tracks just to fit within railway loading gauges. Arriving near the front, the tracks had to be swapped again, a process requiring several hours and specialized equipment. The Sherman weighed 30 metric tons. It could cross most bridges. It could be transported on standard rail cars or driven under its own power for considerable distances without mechanical failure. No track swapping was required. An American armor division could relocate 100 miles in 48 hours. A German panzer division required 4 to 5 days to accomplish the same movement, and would typically arrive with 20 to 30% of its tanks requiring immediate maintenance. Fuel consumption told a similar story. A Tiger I consumed roughly 450 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers under ideal conditions, and significantly more in combat. A Sherman consumed 250 liters for the same distance. This might seem like a minor difference until you consider it at scale. A panzer division required 3 times the fuel logistics of an equivalent American armored division. In a war where Germany was desperately short of petroleum and the Allies controlled most of the world's oil production, this disparity was catastrophic. The Germans also faced a parts nightmare. Each Tiger required specialized components manufactured to precise tolerances. The Maybach engine, the Alver transmission, the interleaved suspension, all demanded specific replacement parts. Germany's industrial system, already stressed by Allied bombing and raw material shortages, struggled to produce these components in sufficient quantity. American factories, by contrast, churned out standardized Sherman parts by the ton. A damaged Sherman transmission could be replaced with one from any other Sherman variant. Wheels, tracks, gun components, all were interchangeable. By late 1944, German armored units often had more tanks listed on paper than they could actually field. Units would report 30 tanks in their order of battle but have only 15 operational. The others sat immobilized, waiting for parts, waiting for fuel, waiting for trained mechanics who themselves were in increasingly short supply. American armored divisions typically maintained 85 to 90% operational readiness. The difference wasn't German mechanical incompetence, it was the inevitable result of operating complex, non-standardized equipment in a deteriorating logistical environment. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West, demonstrated these dynamics with devastating clarity. Launched on December 16, 1944, the offensive concentrated virtually every available German armored resource in the West. The plan depended on speed, punching through American lines and reaching the Meuse River crossings before American reinforcements could arrive. Hitler himself insisted the attack would succeed because German armor was superior to anything the Americans could field. The offensive achieved initial surprise. German forces penetrated deep into American positions. Kampfgruppe, spearheaded by Tiger IIs and Panthers, advanced rapidly in the first 48 hours. For a brief moment, it seemed the German High Command's confidence might be justified. Then the weather cleared. American fighter bombers, grounded during the offensive's opening days by fog and snow, took to the skies. And behind the front lines, the American response was already mobilizing. The 101st Airborne was rushed to Bastogne. The 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions were ordered north. Patton's Third Army pivoted 90 degrees and drove toward the breakthrough. And with these units came the Shermans. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. Kampfgruppe, which had advanced so dramatically, ground to a halt near La Gleize. Not because American armor defeated it in direct combat, though there were fierce engagements, but because it ran out of fuel. The Germans had planned to capture American fuel dumps to sustain their advance, but American engineers destroyed the dumps before German forces could reach them. Paper's magnificent Tiger IIs, the most powerful tanks in the world, sat immobilized for lack of diesel fuel. When Paper finally abandoned his vehicles and retreated on foot, he left behind dozens of tanks that had never been defeated in combat but had been rendered useless by logistics. The Americans, meanwhile, kept fighting. They lost Shermans by the dozen in brutal winter combat. But the losses meant nothing because replacement vehicles arrived continuously. The famous image of an American armored column stretching back 20 miles wasn't propaganda, it was the visible manifestation of industrial capacity. Every mile of that column represented tanks, fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, recovery vehicles, all flowing forward in an unending stream. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By January 1945, the Bulge had been eliminated. German armored forces had been shattered. The offensive cost Germany approximately 600 tanks and assault guns, irreplaceable losses. The Americans lost roughly 700 Shermans, but by February, every single one had been replaced, and American tank strength in Europe was actually higher than it had been in December. This was when German generals began to understand what they had dismissed. General Major F.W. von Mellenthin, who served as chief of staff to several panzer armies, wrote in his post-war analysis, "We had failed to grasp that the war had become one of industrial production. Our magnificent Tigers and Panthers were masterpieces, but the Americans buried us under mountains of their simple Shermans." quality became irrelevant when confronted with such quantity. The testimony of captured German officers, interrogated by Allied intelligence in the final months of the war, reveals a growing desperation and bewilderment. These were professional soldiers, many with decades of experience, watching their world collapse. One Panzer colonel, captured in March 1945, told his interrogators, "You don't understand. You win not because you are better soldiers. You win because you can afford to lose. We destroy 10 of your tanks, and you send 20. We cannot sustain this. We never could." The final statistics are stark. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, the Western Allies had deployed approximately 49,000 Shermans to Europe. Germany's total production of all tank types during the entire war was approximately 27,000 vehicles. Just the Shermans, not counting British, Soviet, or other Allied tanks, outnumbered every tank Germany ever built. But the numbers alone don't convey the psychological weight of this disparity. Imagine being a German tank commander in early 1945. You've survived years of combat. You're skilled, experienced. You know your Panther or Tiger can destroy any American tank in a fair fight. And none of it matters. Because there are no fair fights. Every engagement is against overwhelming numbers. Every victory is temporary because tomorrow brings more Shermans. Every defeat is final because there are no replacements for your side. The German tank crews fought brilliantly to the end. Many of the war's most famous tank aces, Whitman, Carius, Nispel, were Germans who achieved extraordinary kill ratios against Allied armor. But these individual achievements meant nothing strategically. Michael Whitman, perhaps the most famous tank ace of the war, destroyed 138 Allied tanks and assault guns before being killed in August 1944. His skill was undeniable. His impact on the war's outcome was negligible. The Allies barely noticed the loss of those 138 vehicles. They were replaced within days. This was the ultimate irony. German mockery of the Sherman was technically justified. The Sherman was inferior in direct combat against German heavy tanks. But the Germans were fighting the wrong war. They had optimized for tactical excellence in individual engagements while America had optimized for strategic sustainability across an entire theater of war. It was the military equivalent of a chess master losing to someone who can place 1,000 pieces on the board for every one piece the master places. The broader lesson extended beyond tanks. Germany in World War II repeatedly made the error of pursuing technological sophistication over practical efficiency. The Me-262 jet fighter was technologically superior to any Allied aircraft, but Germany produced fewer than 1,500 operational jets. America produced over 96,000 P-51 Mustangs, a propeller-driven fighter that was merely excellent rather than revolutionary. The Mustangs won through availability, reliability, and numbers. German U-boats, particularly the Type XXI submarine introduced late in the war, were technological marvels. But Germany completed only 4 operational Type XXIs before the war ended. America produced thousands of mass-produced destroyer escorts specifically designed to hunt submarines. The escorts weren't as sophisticated as individual U-boats, but there were so many of them that German submarines couldn't operate without constant harassment. The pattern repeated across every domain. German infantry rifles were precision manufactured. Soviet and American rifles were crude by comparison but could be produced in vast quantities. German artillery was accurate and powerful. Allied artillery was less sophisticated but available in overwhelming volume. Germany optimized for quality. The Allies optimized for quantity. In a war of attrition, quantity won. The final campaigns of the war in Europe demonstrated this dynamic in its purest form. By April 1945, German armored units existed mostly on paper. A panzer division might report 50 tanks in its order of battle, but only 7 or 8 would be operational. The rest sat broken down, out of fuel, or abandoned for lack of parts. The crew quality was a shadow of what it had been. Experienced veterans were dead or captured. Their replacements were barely trained teenagers, thrown into combat in tanks they didn't fully understand. Against this, the Americans deployed fully equipped armored divisions with near-complete operational readiness. Every Sherman had fuel. Every Sherman had ammunition. Every Sherman had a trained crew backed by a maintenance team, a supply chain, and the absolute certainty that if the tank was destroyed, another would take its place. The psychological impact of this certainty on American crews cannot be overstated. They fought knowing that losses were temporary setbacks, not permanent defeats. The contrast between German and American tank crew experiences in the final months illustrates this perfectly. An American tanker who lost his Sherman in April 1945 could expect to receive a replacement vehicle within 24 to 48 hours. If wounded but not seriously, he would be treated at a field hospital, returned to his unit, and assigned to another crew or tank within days. The American replacement system, while not perfect, ensured that units remained at or near full strength. A German tanker in the same situation faced a very different reality. If his tank was destroyed, there was no replacement. If wounded, medical care was increasingly scarce, and transportation to hospitals was problematic due to fuel shortages and Allied air superiority. If he survived and returned to his unit, he might find himself assigned to infantry duty simply because there were no tanks for him to crew. The psychological toll of watching one's specialized skills become irrelevant was devastating. German officers' post-war memoirs reveal their growing horror as they realized what they faced. General Hermann Bulck, one of Germany's most capable panzer commanders, wrote, "The American advantage was not in their tanks, which were inferior to ours individually. Their advantage was that they had rendered individual quality irrelevant. They fought with a system that could tolerate enormous losses and continue functioning. We fought with a system that collapsed if losses exceeded our limited replacement capacity." This realization came too late to change anything. By the time German leadership understood that the war was one of production rather than tactical excellence, Germany's industrial capacity had been so degraded by bombing and resource shortages that even a change in strategy would have accomplished nothing. The time to build a war economy optimized for mass production was 1939, not 1944. The Sherman tank, mocked by German officers as crude and inferior, ended the war having served in every theater where American forces fought. Shermans landed on Pacific islands and fought Japanese tanks. Shermans rolled through North Africa and Italy. Shermans liberated France and drove into Germany itself. The tank that German generals dismissed as unworthy became the symbol of Allied victory through sheer ubiquity. There's a photograph, taken in May 1945, of a Sherman parked in front of the Reichstag in Berlin. The tank is mud-splattered, battle-scarred, clearly not fresh from the factory. Painted on its hull is a long list of place names: Normandy, Saint-Lô, Bastogne, the Rhine. That Sherman, or one like it, had fought across Europe. It had been hit, repaired, and returned to service. Its crew had been rotated out and replaced multiple times. The tank itself was probably on its second or third engine, fourth or fifth set of tracks. Nothing about it was impressive from an engineering standpoint. But it was there. In Berlin. At the end. That was all that mattered. The lesson extends far beyond World War II. Military historians have studied the Sherman phenomenon extensively because it challenges fundamental assumptions about how wars are won. The natural instinct is to seek advantage through superior technology, better training, more skilled commanders. All of these matter. But Aérocourt, the bulge, and the final collapse of German armor demonstrated that sustainability, logistics, and industrial capacity can overwhelm tactical advantages. Modern military forces still grapple with this tension. Every advanced weapons system, stealth fighters, nuclear submarines, precision missiles, faces the same question: how many can we actually afford to build and maintain? A weapons system that's twice as effective but 10 times as expensive to produce and maintain might actually reduce overall capability rather than enhance it. The Sherman principle, that a sufficient number of good enough weapons can overwhelm a smaller number of superior weapons, remains relevant. The German generals who mocked the Sherman weren't wrong about its technical limitations. They were wrong about what would determine the war's outcome. They optimized for the war they wanted to fight, a war of tactical brilliance and technological superiority, while America optimized for the war that actually occurred, a grinding, attrition-based conflict where the side that could sustain losses and replace them would eventually prevail. In the end, 50,000 Shermans didn't roll into Europe despite being inferior. They rolled into Europe and won because the very factors that made them inferior in German eyes, simplicity, ease of production, reliability, were actually the qualities that mattered most in industrial-age warfare. The Germans built masterpieces. The Americans built machines. The machines won. The irony is perfect and complete. Every technical criticism German officers leveled at the Sherman was accurate. And every single one of those criticisms missed the point entirely. The Sherman wasn't designed to win tank duels. It was designed to win a war of production. And it did exactly that, grinding through 3 years of constant combat, being destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt, never stopping, never faltering, until there was nothing left to oppose it. When von Mancherfeld stood in his turret near Ercourt in September 1944 and saw that endless tide of American armor, he was witnessing the future of warfare. Not a future of technological marvels and tactical genius, but a future where industrial capacity would determine outcomes. He just didn't realize it yet. None of them did. Not until it was far too late. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.